Hello there. My name is Wes Osborne. I'm the Executive Director of the Central Library Consortium, and I'm happy to talk with you today about implementing MessageBee for library email notices. And we kind of subtitled this program From Eeeek to Ahhh, and we'll definitely get into more of those details as to why we think that's fitting later. I'm here to talk some about the high-level aspects of the implementation process, and then I'm also fortunate to be joined by my colleague, Mike Fields. You want to say hello, Mike?
Sure. I'm Michael Fields. I'm the developer for the CLC, and as Wes mentioned, I'm here to kind of dive into some of the more technical details about our process.
Get started here talking a little bit about what the different topics are that we hope to cover today. So we want to really outline the problems that we find with the traditional ILS notice process, talk about a variety of different solutions that you could look to solve some of those issues, discuss why CLC selected MessageBee, and then as we alluded to, Mike will get into the implementation details about MessageBee, and then we'll talk a little bit about what things might look like in the future. So the problems with ILS notices, I put this little graphic over here because in some ways, I think that our ILS notices currently look a little bit like ransom notes, right? Or the way I used to say it, looked like they were typed on a typewriter and then faxed over to somebody and then scanned into email. So just from a pure appearance standpoint, they're not very good. And the appearance is more than just about aesthetics, right? When all this information looks the same on the notice, it's really hard for somebody to pick out the part that is the most relevant for them. So I think even though appearance may seem superficial, just presenting the information in a more coherent way can be helpful to folks that are receiving these notices. So in addition to that, we also find that the traditional ILS notices aren't very dynamic, and there's several issues with that dynamicness. One of them is that the wording has to be managed by the ILS administrator traditionally. And the ILS administrator, particularly in these times of COVID, there are a lot of other changes that are happening with libraries on a regular basis. And in our environment, where we're a consortium where we manage the wording for several member libraries, it was becoming really difficult for us to be able to keep up with the changes that were happening on the ground with member libraries. So it's a little challenging the way that the ILS administrator has to control the wording. If you do decide to do something a little more with your notices, and which Polaris in some ways does support, Polaris is the ILS that CLC uses. Even if you were to make some of those changes then end up being very delicate, meaning that if you have upgrades and things that occur, you always have to spend a lot of time going back and making certain that the changes really are the way that they need to be and that they survived the upgrade. Another aspect of dynamicness is that your marketing folks, if they would like to utilize this touch point with your patrons or your customers or borrowers, it's something that it's hard for them to add their information into, right? Email is one of the highest touch points between the ILS and patrons. Even patrons that don't use the pack to determine what they're going to check out next, that still just happen to go into the building and check out material, they will still receive a notice in many cases from the ILS. So it's something that is interacted with a lot by lots of people, and probably more people than use your discovery layer interact with email notices. But your marketing teams typically can't really take advantage of the email notices, or if they can, it's a very cumbersome process and they can't kind of pre-program information that they would like to include in those transactional notices. Another challenge that we see with email notices is that email was never really built to handle the onslaught of spam and all these other purposes that it's been used for over the past 20 years. It really is the only universal cross-platform notification system. And in all honesty, you don't have to have an email account anywhere to send an email. I know that sounds very strange, but behind the scenes with the way email works, you can actually do certain things so that you're able to generate emails for individuals just by issuing special commands. So because email has had all of these problems, deliverability has really been an issue. And this is a quote that I put from Jeff Atwood, who co-founded Stack Overflow and also Discourse, both very popular communication platforms. And he says, just because you send an email doesn't mean it will arrive, not by a long shot. This ecosystem around email is a dank miasma of half implemented, incompletely supported anti spam hacks and workarounds, which means the odds of that random email in your code, or in this case, in your ILS, just getting that you just sent, getting to its specific destination is spotty at best. So if you're just taking that out of the box experience, there's a lot of potential that those notices aren't actually making it to the people that you hope that they will. So what are the potential solutions that you can consider for these problems? You could roll your own solutions to some of these problems, particularly the problem around poor deliverability, that being able to make sure that the message gets delivered. You can fix that by routing your email through a third-party provider. And if you wanted to do things with improving the way your notices look, you could build a email replacement system on your own. And actually, our developer, Mike, had really undertaken a big part of that project a couple of years ago and it made significant progress there. But we ended up in a situation where even though that we could deliver the messages, we weren't really turning over a lot of the power and control back to our member libraries to be able to edit and tweak those in a really easy and convenient way. So it takes a high degree of expertise. And even if you have that expertise, knowing that you will want to dedicate it specifically to this purpose when there are other solutions out there is a difficult decision to make, particularly when there are some other options out there on the marketplace. So let's talk about what those are. One of them that you may or may not be aware of is that the Vega platform is really that. It is a platform that Innovative is looking on. You may have heard about it most in the context of discovery, which is what they've focused on the most right now and have deployed in some instances a discovery platform that is a part of it. But really, they are now focusing on wanting this to be a whole CRM marketing platform that they're building, which is a very great and interesting idea, particularly for public libraries. However, Innovative is building this platform on their own. They're not simply relabeling another CRM or marketing platform. That's great because it has the potential to really focus in on solutions that work best for libraries, but that does mean that they have to build it all on their own. So it's really hard to say how long it's going to take before Vega might deliver better notices. This little graphic here, right? The idea of the bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. From CLC standpoint, we've been talking with the problem of notices back in 2012 and 2013. We really started working with Polaris staff at that time to see what could be done. And then we continued those conversations with Innovative. And frankly, we were tired of waiting. So I don't doubt that the current Innovative team is really committed to this CRM platform, and part of that being an improvement in the notices. But at this stage for CLC, we really wanted a solution that we could deliver right now. So Vega wasn't a good option for us. However, there's another company that some of you may be aware of called Patron Point. Patron Point actually got started right here in Central Ohio, where Mike and I are from. So we've talked with the Patron Point folks for some time, very familiar with them. Great folks out there. They initially, though, started really as an email marketing platform. So they were really focused on this idea of marketing to your patrons when they signed up for cards, or maybe reaching out to people in the area to encourage them to sign up for cards. Really a good, pure kind of marketing company that was delivering some great solutions in that sphere. They then wanted to add in support for transactional email, which is really what notices are. They're giving you information about your account or transactions that have occurred with your account. So they're not pure marketing. They're really more focused on those aspects of transactional information with your account. So they added that later on to their platform, which I think makes a lot of sense. But at the time we were really starting with our investigations, they really didn't have this transactional email support. They are a newer company, Patron Point is, but It does include several industry veterans, folks that have been in the library space and in the ILS space particularly for some time. So they really seem to be executing very well. And I think they're certainly worth a look if you were considering looking for a solution today. You may want to reach out to the Patron Point folks and see if what they're offering might fit for your organization in the aspect of transactional notices. But for CLC, for us, the timing perspective and all these other items, MessageBee, which is a service from Unique Management Services. Unique Management Services is traditionally known for their collection agency process or materials recovery process. So they've done that work a lot with member libraries. That's what they're most well known for, but they have other types of products as well, several others. And one of them is MessageBee, which has a couple of different components, but we're going to focus primarily today discussing the email notification part of MessageBee. So why did we select MessageBee? Well, there are a couple of reasons from the company aspect. So the aspect of why we would want to work with Unique Management Services. One of them is that Unique has always been really mindful of the patron experience. When you think about that process that they primarily started out with, the collection agency or materials recovery, there's lots of ways that that could go poorly, right? And lots of bad interactions that could happen with that. But they've always been really good about handling that process with grace. And so we were kind of encouraged by the fact that if they considered the patron experience so carefully in the materials recovery side of things, that they would also have that same attention to care when it comes to the transactional email notices. Another aspect was that they were really open to feedback on improvements to the product. There were several things that they did not have when we initially looked at the product that they talked about adding and added to the system. They really were committed to developing it and making this system meet the needs of customers or potential customers in our case. Mike will talk specifically about one of those later on regarding bounce handling, because that's something they added to the product for us. Another great thing for us was that we were able to work directly with the technical team. So we didn't have a lot of middle people that we had to go through. Not that there aren't great reasons for those, but when you're looking at something as critical as notice delivery and the timing and all those things regarding notice delivery, you want to know that you have kind of direct access to that technical team or the engineering team on their side. And we were able to gain access to that. This one's a little bit on both sides of things, both from a company and a product perspective. But from a company perspective, one of the things that was helpful for us is that Unique was willing to kind of help hold the hand for our members. I mentioned earlier that we had developed an transactional email product, but what we struggled with was getting that implemented for all of our members. So what we really wanted was a company that would be able to work individually with each of our member libraries to kind of make certain the product did what they needed to, and that we could in some ways turn that job or that work over to them and have confidence that it was getting done to the quality that we wanted it to be. So those are our reasons from a company perspective. From a product perspective, one of the absolute keys for us is that we are a consortium of 17 member libraries, and our member libraries all have their own branding and goals that they have with their transactional email notices. So we really needed flexibility down to the library level and in some cases the branch level for those odd service points like pickup lockers and vending machines. So it was very important that the product be able to have that degree of flexibility of customization. Talked a little bit about bounce handling, but one of the things that we really needed, because we'd had it for a long time, was the ability for the system to automatically handle what happens if an email bounces. And again, Mike will touch on that a little bit later. We talked about the importance of making certain that the email process is set up in the right way so that it doesn't get stopped by the spam or bulk email services. So it was important for us to have a product that would do proper implementation of DMARC, which is one of the email sending verification processes that's out there. So we needed a product that would support that and support it for all the different domains that our member libraries used. And then we wanted a product that would utilize the Polaris API or the ILS's API as much as possible. We didn't want to implement a bunch of kind of workarounds unless absolutely necessary. We really wanted to utilize the API as much as possible, and that's really what Innovative has done. They're utilizing the Polaris API as much as possible. There are some areas where that's not possible today that Mike will talk about, but they really are dedicated to using the API as much as possible, and that helps make a process that is going to work better as we do upgrades and all that. We won't have to worry that it could potentially break something with the notice process. So that's why we selected MessageBee from a product perspective. Let's get into the details about implementation. We will talk really here mostly about how to implement MessageBee with Polaris, although there are several of the steps that I will discuss that would apply no matter where you were implementing MessageBee. So even if you're not a Polaris library, if you're Sierra or using another product, many of these steps are still going to be important for you to consider. So let's talk about the outline of the things that you'll need to do. You should perform sending domain verification of where you're going to send the emails from. You need to verify that domain. You'll need to set up your templates in MessageBee. You'll need to get the export process working and the update process working. So I'm going to talk with you first about the sending domain verification and the MessageBee templates. And actually, those two things could be done at the same time. And then Mike will get into the details about exporting the notices and what the update process works like. One of the big things I would say as you think about implementation is to give yourself enough time. I would suggest a minimum of 8 weeks for implementation. It could probably be something that would be done in a month if you really had all of your resources behind it and you were just one library system and one domain. Although some of the steps that we're going to talk about warming up your email domain piece are some things that you really can't rush. So if you bring a new domain out there, you really can't rush the domain warm up process part of that. And that's what we're going to talk about here first is getting the domain selected and performing the sending domain verification. So deciding which domain is going to be utilized to send your notices from is the first step. And you might just think that all you need to do is say, whatever my library is, my regular email addresses are, that's the domain that I want to use to send my notices. But that may not be the best idea. Each domain that is out there in the world that sends emails has a reputation that is being scored by the different vendors that receive emails. So the Office 365s, the Gmails, the Yahoo's, all those folks are looking at their systems and they're saying, where is email coming from? What domains is it coming from? And they're assigning a reputation to that domain. And if you are mixing in your main email domain personal messages from people, so an email that you might send to a colleague or somebody from another organization, a personal email, messages that are coming from the ILS that are transactional messages and marketing messages, if those are all coming from the same domain, it actually could harm your domain's email reputation. And what that means is that if you send a personal email to somebody, there's a possibility that it might end up in their spam or bulk email message folder because it's being intermixed with all of those other types of messages. So I'd really recommend that you think about setting up a specific subdomain for your notices. So something like notices.librarydomain.org. That helps keep your reputation good for your regular email sending on your main domain. And really kind of specifies what the purpose of that particular domain is for. You'll see this probably already if you look at some of the emails in your inbox from a marketing perspective. It's very common from a marketing perspective to have a subdomain that's utilized, again, because that impacts domain health and domain reputation. If you are going to establish a new domain, it's a good idea to send just a few messages from that domain so that you kind of get it warmed up. One of the things that email receivers are wary of, if there's a brand new domain that shows up on the scene and it sends 10 or 15,000 messages, it seems like that's a high potential. It could be a spam domain. So warm up any new domains that you might be using, and I'll have some suggestions for that later. Then as the next step of this process, make certain that you have access to all of the needed areas to enter in DNS records. The way you do domain verification to say this service is sending email on behalf of my domain, you verify that by adding DNS records. So you may need to check with your IT department or whoever has control over your domain. Might be a webmaster or a third-party company that does your website maintenance that has your domain. You need to talk with them so that when Eeeek gives you the DNS entries to add, you'll have a place where you'll be able to add them. So that's the first step about getting the domain set up. Next, I want to talk with you about setting up your templates. And this process is really going to involve MessageBee, but there are a couple of steps here that you can really take on your own. The big one being deciding who's going to lead this process for your organization. You want to make sure you've got the right people on board and that they have the time to dedicate to this. So it could be your ILS administrator, or you could be deciding that it makes more sense to turn over notices to your marketing department or maybe your circulation department. If your circulation manager is the one who typically follows up on these things and is the one that is responsible for changing wording, it may make sense to have them lead the implementation part of this process and really understand how this works the best. So decide who within your organization is really going to lead the implementation side of the creation of the templates in particular. Then decide, you've really got two approaches, I think, to how you want to go from there. It could be either notice by notice or a transparent swap. So that in setting up your templates, you could go notice by notice in setting up your templates, or you could do what I've called a transparent swap. And I'm going to discuss more of the details between these two as I walk you through the differences. But you could kind of go either direction when it comes to your templates. One of the things that's important to note is that Eeeek's going to help you through this process. So they're going to help you no matter if you go for a transparent swap or notice by notice, you'll be able to work with them as part of this. So let's look at what a notice by notice template implementation process would look like. The idea here is that you would start deploying the notices, certain notices, one at a time to help you fully test things that are out there. So you would design your new templates, including branding and adding in any glyphs or icons or figuring out how to implement and include your book jacket covers. You would figure out what wording you're going to use for notices, and this is a big time to consider shortening up any wording that you have. Folks are not going to read all of the wording that you put out there, all the finer details that you might put in the notices. So good time to reset and think about what is truly important that you need to include with your notice wording. And of course, shorter is always better. Make sure you think about how you're going to do unsubscribe instructions. Unsubscribe instructions are important because, again, your email can be scored poorly if you don't include information about how somebody can stop getting their email notices. Make certain to think about any marketing campaigns that you want to add into your process. So if you want to add some highlights for marketing things on your footers or headers, you want to get all those figured out. And then think about deploying, and this is kind of my suggestion in terms of deploying the notices, releasing your canceled hold notices, your overdue notices, your reminder notices, and then finish with holds pickup. The reason we're suggesting finishing with holds pickup is that if you think about it, the holds pickup notices are probably the notices that are most important to most organizations and the ones that are most timely. You have fail safes for some of these other notice types, but hold pickup notices are very important that folks receive them in a very timely fashion. If you start with some of these other notice types, it allows you to warm up the domain and get all of the kinks worked out in the process before you have the most important notice, in our case, the holds pickup notice, which you would then send out last. So kind of a good way to think about the process of warming things up or getting the process working. In our case, we actually also did it library by library, so we could kind of do the process that way as well and make certain that we worked out all the implementation details. Now, I do have a note here that I made about setting up the marketing campaigns. Don't add too many of those, right? You don't want to overload your transactional notices with marketing information because that could impact your scores for the incoming email and make it more likely to end up in spam or bulk messages if you're including that type of information. So this is the notice by notice process. The nice part about this is when you've set it all up this way, you're completely done then. You finished, when you finish this, you finished your implementation process completely. Another approach that you might consider, depending on what resources you have available, are this transparent method. And this would be taking the current look and feel of the Polaris notices and just copying that. So just in the end product that the patron would receive, it would look exactly the same, but it would be utilizing this brand new system and have the capability to do a lot more behind the scenes. Even if you copy the current look and feel, make certain to add unsubscribe instructions if you didn't have them. Um, so get the template set up that way and then move the messages over to MessageBee. And again, suggestions about deploying them in this staggered rollout with the cancel hold notices being first. I guess I should say this would be the suggestion for a public library. If you're an academic library, the main thing here is just to think about which notices you have the least of, and then start with those first, and then move your way to the ones that you have the most of, or the ones that are most critical for you to be sending. This transparent email process could be really useful in a consortia environment where you want to move your entire consortia over to MessageBee, but it's really difficult to figure out how to align all of the resources to get all the branding stuff in there and the icons in there and the wording in there and all those things. If that's seeming to be too daunting, but you would like to still move to MessageBee, or you have a few members that are ready to do that, you could consider this transparent process so that for folks that aren't ready, they can still be using MessageBee. And then when they are ready, Eeeek or they themselves could go into the templating system and actually make those other changes to make the improvements to the templates when they're ready. So this is a little less satisfying because in the end, all of the messages may not look as nice, but you're over on the new platform and you're then set up to do the next step with being able to customize the notices in whatever way works best for folks as they are ready for that. Just a little tip and a suggestion here, and when you're going through this process, it's a great idea if you can use this site, which is completely free, Mail Tester. So if you go to mailtester.com, mail-tester.com, the link's here in the slide deck, it will give you an email address, one that it generates each time. What you can then do is take your notices and set them up, set up the notices that you have that you think are ready to send to this, and it will actually then receive those notices and it will score all those things that we talked about to make certain that your messages are likely to be received. So it'll look for those things like unsubscribe links. It'll look to make sure that you have good domain reputation. It'll check to make certain that all those domain verification steps have been done. So really great tool to use. I would say even if you're needing to test your marketing messages, this is a great system to use, mailtester.com. So that talks about those aspects of the implementation process, but I'm going to turn it over now to Mike so he can walk you through the part of the process where the system needs to interact with the ILS. So over to you, Mike.
Alrighty. So first here's just a list of requirements. It's pretty light. There's really not too much. But the one big thing that will catch a good number of people is that it requires the ability to access the file system on your database server. So if you're hosted, I mean, there may be a workaround that MessageBee has in place somehow, but it's not something that I'm aware of. But other than that, you just need a Polaris API, or you need the Polaris API, and a Polaris API key, and you need a Polaris user to use in some of the PAPI protected calls in the API in order to update the notices. So here's just a quick kind of overview of the actual export process itself. Um, so it all kind of runs through a main PowerShell script that gets kicked off by the notice database jobs. Um, that's kind of the first step there. As like I said, the notice job kicks off this PowerShell script. Um, at that point, the the export is built up based on a SQL script that's in the job folder. Um, it takes and generates the checksum for that export to make sure that so the MessageBee can verify that the data that they receive is all valid. After it has both those files, it takes and sends them up to Unique, sending the checksum first. Um, and then it then and this part is as far as I know unique to our implementation, but after it uploads the export, it then goes through and updates all of the notices, so that way whenever we run the next step of the notice job to send the SMS emails, it doesn't go through and send all the email notices at the same time. So and this is just a quick look at what that kind of folder or that job folder structure looks like. In the root there is the export script, and then a small little settings file that we have to support some of our custom bits. And other than that, it's just the SQL script there, and then as well as a SFTP utility for uploading the files to Unique. Um, and that's about it there. So, this is a quick look at that settings file that we have. It's very basic, very simple, just a straight text file, just one kind of setting per line. And this is a sample that I made to send to another library that kind of describes which setting would go on each line. This is a quick look at kind of the database setup part of it. So there are two jobs that you need to modify. One being notice processing, the other being hold notice processing. Um, and so it's you just add the step to send the notices after everything is generated and right before the email step runs. We have a second step in our notices processing job. It's kind of like a fail-safe to make sure that there's no notices left over after the MessageBee job runs. But as far as I know, it's never actually been hit, so it's probably not all that important. And then down there in the bottom right is just a look at what that actual step looks like, and it's like I said, just a simple PowerShell script or a PowerShell step that runs the export script.
So
And
Mike,
I think that's it for me for now. So I'm gonna send it back over to Wes.
yeah, one quick follow-up question, Mike. These scripts and these pieces that are out there that you've been mentioning, if other folks needed those or wanted those, I think MessageBee has some, and then if need be, they could reach out to you.
Yeah, MessageBee has. I don't think they have the absolute newest version of our stuff at the moment, but we have been sending them updates kind of along the way. We just haven't had a chance to send them the newest stuff. So yeah, so I mean, so anything that people need, they can feel free to reach out.
And the other thing Mike talked about, this is the process for Polaris that we're aware of for our organization. Um, Certainly, if you're a Sierra customer or a customer of another ILS, you want to talk with MessageBee about what the implementation process might look like. Or even if you're a Polaris hosted customer, MessageBee may be aware of other things. I think the main takeaway for you from this process should be that if you want to know if you could integrate MessageBee with Polaris under these conditions, it's possible. And we send Mike how many notices? Lots, right?
It is a significant number.
Hundreds of thousands. So if you're concerned about it being able to keep up with the volume and all those things. This shows you that it's very possible to make that happen. So remember, we started with this process, right? This ransom note or this fax looking message that was out there. When you're done with all of this setup and all of this implementation, this is what you have the potential for your notices to look like. This is a notice from my local library, which also happens to be a CLC member library. So you've got great formatting with their preferred color scheme, with information there with the book jacket cover. You've got on the right-hand side, that's the information that was lower on the page. So I just split it into these two screenshots for you, but you've got the details about their marketing platform for the 1,000 books program that they're doing, and then details about unsubscribing if you would like to unsubscribe. The main key here being the sky is the limit in terms of what the template looks like for you. Don't forget that the wording is something that can also now be controlled by somebody other than the ILS administrator. There's also stats and things like that that are available to you that you may not have had available before. Also behind the scenes, this is a multi-part my message. So that means that the plain text versions, if they're needed, are going to automatically be there in the background for you. So lots and lots of good stuff when you've gone through this process, including, and I'm going to turn it back over to Mike to talk with you about this process, the bounce handling. That's something that we touched on before. So Mike, do you want to walk folks through the bounce handling?
Sure. So like Wes mentioned before, email deliverability can be a bit of a challenge. And one of the things that can ding your email reputation is if you have sent an email to somebody and it bounced, and you keep trying to send emails to them, that 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 will over time lower your score. And just in general, I mean, that patron is also not getting their notices, so they don't know that their books are ready to be picked up or that their stuff is overdue or any of that. Um, so back in the old days, actually, probably long ago at this point, Wes, that we can go back in the old days. The staff used to have to go in and look at the report of the bounced emails and clean up the accounts all on their own, and and that works fine. I mean, that's okay. But I imagine that these staff are not fans of that, and so we ended up building a automated way to handle those bounces. Um, and so here's just a quick description of the steps on the slide here. So the first one, the big one, is that the email address is taken off the account. And if there are other accounts that have that same email address, they will be caught by the same process and also get updated. Um, and so after the email address just is removed, if there is not an alternate email address, the um, delivery option is then changed to phone if the patron has one, or mail if they do not. In addition to that, the patron is added to a record set. In case the library decides that they want to go process them some other way, or just have a record of or who may have had problems up to a certain point or whatever. There are different record sets depending on if it's a bounce or a spam. Just that way, in case since there could be different steps that you would want to take on both of those, so they get broken out into their own record sets. And finally, a note is added to each of the patron accounts with the date, the email address, and a short description of kind of what the event was. It was a bounce, a spam, or invalid email, and then that kind of just gives the staff a record of what actually happened. So the patron says, "Oh, hey, I stopped getting my emails," and then they can say, "Oh, well, look, on this day, you got a bounce or whatever," and to let them know what's going on. So
I think right now, Mike, for us in our version of Polaris, which is 6.6, there's some stuff that we've had to do to help this process, but my understanding is with Polaris 7.0 and later, it's just um, part of the Polaris API. So there would be nothing somebody would need to do special to get the bounce handling.
correct. Yeah, I'm not certain what the version is, but it's something like that. And yeah, it's just so there's one small piece where we have a custom API for adding the note, but that is either in Polaris or is coming in the extremely near future.
And that note is a non-blocking note, correct?
Correct. Correct. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, so it's just there for informational purposes. And again,
Exactly.
obviously, if you have a different ILS, your configuration may be different in terms of what nodes could be added or how the bounce handling could occur. And I think MessageBee, even if you can't update the ILS, has some ways of preventing messages from going to bounced addresses, just from the standpoint of, as Mike said, maintaining your email domain reputation. So they can help with that, even if there are situations where maybe the integration isn't there with your ILS. But if you have a Polaris system, we can let you know it does work, and it's very, very nice. Folks like it a lot. I'm going to take just a moment and talk with you about what CLC is hoping to do with MessageBee in the future. So one of the big things we're looking to do is deploy support for multiple languages. So that's something that is supported on the MessageBee side for certain, but we just don't have that as part of that export process that Mike talked about right now. So we're going to be looking to add that in the future, so that if patrons have a preferred language that they'd like to receive their notices in, and the library has worked to set up a template for that language, that they'll be able to support that and send those in their preferred language. We are also looking to move our SMS notice process over to MessageBee. In our case, within the CLC, which is in the state of Ohio, we're going to be also taking part of Oakland's SMS sending process and utilizing that. In our case, what we're doing is we're going to send the messages to MessageBee, the data to MessageBee, and then MessageBee is going to build the notice, and then Oakland will actually send the notice itself. The reason that we're wanting the messages to go through MessageBee is, again, back to that local control thing. It allows member libraries then to be in control of what they would like to use for their SMS wording. And it also allows us to kind of break the mold of what's allowed in the current Polaris SMS notices. We'll be able to, with that data that gets exported using the script that Mike created, export other information that libraries might choose to put in the SMS notices that we weren't typically able to have there, because the information that could be sent out of Polaris was fixed. So we'll use MessageBee for the customization, Oakland for the actual delivery. Using Oakland for the delivery helps save us money. If you're interested, MessageBee can actually do the delivery for you as well. But in our case, we're looking to use Oakland because that'll be a less expensive process for us. The other thing that I mentioned here is support for fully hosted clients in the future. And that isn't to say that CLC will be hosted in the short-term future, but certainly that is the case for many, many customers. That is currently pending some improvements to the Polaris API from Innovative. CLC is actually contracted with Innovative to deliver those improvements, and we're certainly hopeful that they'll be able to deliver those soon. They're, I think, spending some time focusing on their Vega notice delivery piece, but our hope is that they'll be able to return their attention to the providing access to the notice queue through the API. And once that happens, this ability to have notices delivered by a third party like MessageBee or Patron Point will be super easy for any customers, either those that are self-hosted or those that are fully hosted. So we're looking forward to that and coming hopefully in the future, and that will make this process so much easier for us and any other hosted customer. It'll allow you to also access things. So keep an eye on those API release notes to see if that's an improvement that is in the release when you do your upgrades. So we want to thank you for your time today and learning about MessageBee. We wanted to make you aware that for the question and answer session that is on the 24th, not only will Mike and I be available to answer any of your questions that you have about implementation, but we've also got the folks from Eeeek that will be there and will be able to answer your questions. Depending on how much time we have, they may be able to even show you around a little bit in their interface that they have, but strongly encourage you to go out and register for that Q&A session. There's also a place where you can add in your questions right now after you review the video. So if you think of them, you can get those added in, and we'll be sure to try and answer those on the 24th. And it'll also be great to have the MessageBee folks to answer questions from their side, or if you have questions about implementing for other ILS systems. So on behalf of Mike and myself, we'll say goodbye for now, but we hope to talk with you again on the 24th. Take care.